It is black, yes.
And then, can you see that image?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So, Isaac, may I suggest, if you have camera and if you're comfortable, when you want to start, like before the presentation or even while you're presenting, it would be good to turn on your camera when I introduce you to kind of let people see you and so on, only if you're comfortable.
I can do that.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, we just wait for 2-3 more minutes so people can join us, and then we will start.
Sure. I will. I think my work laptop doesn't want me to be able to turn on my camera.
Yeah, okay, that's all right.
It's just like it's auto blocking the camera, which is a bit odd.
Okay.
It's like saying I don't have permission to let it look at me, I guess. Sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. Okay. I think we'd better start. Hi, everyone. My name is Parisa Izzat Panahi, and I'm the course coordinator of Master of Architecture program at Curtin. I would like to welcome you all to the 24th ArchiTalk today. Isaac McCormack has kindly accepted our invite. He's one of the successful Curtin graduates, and he's the first graduates to be presenting at ArchiTalk. He's a graduate with a special talent. I would say the level of creativity and imagination in his works are pretty unique. If you haven't checked, or if you're not following his Instagram page, I would definitely suggest you to have a look. You'll be impressed. Uh, so today, his talk is about narrative landscapes, and I would like him to basically introduce himself a bit further, and then we're all keen to hear your hear and watch your presentation, Isaac. Thank you.
Thank you, Parissa. Yeah, so as Parissa said, I am a Curtin graduate, and I think, yeah, creative and out there is two really good ways to describe my work in a nicer way, other than just a bit weird. But I, yeah, graduated at Curtin and now work for a company here in Perth called GHD Woodhead, and then I sort of have this side passion about narrative and storytelling, which I'd like to tell you all a bit about today. So with that being said, I'm happy to get started, if that's all good, Parissa.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, so today I wanted to talk to you all about this image here and how it relates to Aboriginal culture and architecture. And then I wanted to go on to discuss how this image helped me understand and develop my methods of working in architecture. This image, along with lots of others I'll show today, I've been creating, crafting, and discovering on a journey that goes back to 2018, and how I believe narrative, empathy, and fiction is a way to approach architecture. So to do that, let's go back to 2018 and my thesis, The Library of Make-Believe and Augmented Fantasy. Because there's some things I learned during this that became really important to me throughout my career, and where I become passionate about. In this thesis, I use stories and narratives to explore architectural space and ideas, imagining myself inside spaces as different people, or sitting and watching people and developing stories for their lives. As much as that makes me sound a bit like a serial killer, I read about others and designed space around them. I used collages to capture these stories within a frame, and I would sit within them. Uh, these collages were conducted and created from photos I took on site in the Shinjuku prefecture of Tokyo, selected from this sort of endless sea of activity and noise and light. Projecting myself into random passers-by, I began to make sense of them and the space they inhabited. Some of the stories I wrote about and mapped into this frame were this delivery man running late, or a man after work, or the girl he was on her way to visit, or a man being surrounded by his friends, yet feeling alone and wanting to be alone. I'd like to read you just this little story and the image that goes along with it now, as it might help. So walking through the cold, fat rain, viewing the streetscape through the thin veil of polyurethane, bohemic light mixing with harsh neon, forming unfires of light. The soft shadows of rain falling on his umbrella, juxtaposed with the loud, harsh sounds of pachinko parlors, bars, and his work colleagues arguing where to go tonight. He'd just entered the industry, but he already hates the long hours and being treated like crap by his boss, that then demands he goes drinks after work. Tonight he's been dragged into Kabuki-cho because his boss wants to drink with cute girls. He's not even paying. As he walks along and smells the dashi broth and the udon that drifts out from a small vendor, he wishes to sit there, eat and relax, perhaps read a book. Where else is there to sit in this harsh neon landscape? Accompanying this story was this simple map of the journey he walked through the site. And with this map, story, and collage, I can vividly recall the experiences I saw this young man having. Even now, it's almost 3 years after the event. And what I learnt during this process was something authors and storytellers have known for thousands of years, and that is in the power of stories and the way in which we can empathize and understand a character by walking in their shoes. For when we design spaces, we're not designing for ourselves or our ego or the developer paying us. We're designing for the people who will inhabit these spaces and live in these spaces. So to understand space, you must first understand the people. So this sort of became this thesis statement that I sort of took from my thesis was space and people are one and the same, and they're intimately linked. And then sort of setting out from university, I took that with me. So when I set out from university, I applied for the Peter Hunt Travel Prize, which here in Australia or in Western Australia is when a student graduates, they have the chance to travel and research something that's of interest to them architecturally around the world. And sort of the question and theme that came out of what I wanted to do started from looking at speculative works of architecture from Neil Spiller, Le Corbusier, Peter Cook, and Lebbeus Woods, and how they looked at classical European architecture and reimagined it to express ideas and themes common throughout their architecture, developing speculative worlds in which they could test and explore ideas of architecture. And I want to do the same with my own Aboriginal heritage and Aboriginal culture here in Australia, to look at ideas, traditional practices, architecture, and then culture, then express it again through speculative works of architecture. To learn about it myself and hopefully to help others understand or appreciate different aspects of it. Now, of course, I'm not the first person to think of this. The Afrofuturist movement, which began in the 1980s in the United States of America, uh, a common example people might be familiar with this sort of theme of speculative work is the Black Panther movies. But there are many other examples in fashion, art, and architecture. So to do all that, I set out to New Zealand, the United States of America, and Canada to explore indigenous architecture within these countries and how this architecture and culture is being used in a past, modern, or futuristic context. And I promise these won't just be photos of the places I went. I'm not going to subject you all to my travel snaps. But as I set out, how was I going to understand, note, or capture what I'm seeing and learning from cultures so different from my own? How was I going to break down the world into something I could absorb and something I could understand? The answer came to me the way the answer was, was the way I always had sort of understood and made sense of the world, which was through images and storytelling. And I think these quotes here, plus one more I'll read out in a moment, really help express why I think storytelling in relation to architecture, and particularly Aboriginal and First Nations architecture, is so useful to express and capture ideas. So firstly, the first quote, "I'm writing a story so others might see fragments of themselves, and a book is a dream you hold in your hand." But there's another quote from William Carlos Williams that I think, it's a poem from William Carlos Williams that's really helpful for me. "So much in life depends upon the red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater with two white chickens beside it." When I read this poem, I don't just see that red wheelbarrow. I see a broken asbestos fence, a lemon tree laden with lemons, a rotting vegetable stake half fallen over in a deep, dark, and grey rain. These images are all bits and pieces from my childhood, sitting behind glass, watching it pour outside. So much of myself is brought into that poem, and I can't help but empathize and understand those words. Because again, to understand a space, you must first understand the user. Now, of course, each user is going to be different, but when we're talking about Aboriginal and First Nations architecture in the traditional sense, we're dealing with a culture so alien to our own. We have our own understandings and preconceptions about what space and architecture has to be. But a story gives us empathy. It allows us to walk in another's shoes, breaking down our own preconceptions about space. So with all that being said, uh, as I traveled, I became obsessed with this concept here of terra nullius, because to me it became an exemplar of how alien cultures could not understand aspects of the others. For those who may not be aware, terra nullius, also I am very aware that it is spelt wrong in this image here, but I apologize for that. But for those who may not be aware, terra nullius was a colonial belief or a colonial practice used as a means to invade land by saying there was nothing there and it is our God-given right to take it away and use it to its full potential. And the reason this became so interesting to me was because there was trade complex societies and industries in these lands before settlement or invasion, whatever term you want to call it. But because the settlers could not read and translate the landscape as having factories, textile houses, and communications network, there was nothing there. And of course, there was a want for there nothing to be there that colored their perception because of the sort of economic benefits that came with nothing being there. And this is where my exploration into how narrative could be used came from, because in Australia, we face the same problem of an understanding of culture. I think many people miss the relationship between land and people. So when traveling, I began to I began to construct these images which express an idea or a concept about the architecture or culture in which I was learning about. These stories are tied are tied to stories about settlers arriving into these lands and finding these anomalies or complex structures beyond their own comprehension. This first image here speaks to the sound being used as a form of architecture, warning others away or welcoming them in, inspired by greeting and welcoming rituals in the Maori culture. This one here, the water cradle, was inspired by the ritual in Aboriginal groups in the north of Australia, where they cover wells with stones and then turn them over when the weather is right to create humidity and rain, where there otherwise would be none. This one here is inspired by 2 glasses of wine. It was actually inspired by this image here and the songs that were sung in this space. I wanted to give form to this sound, to this ritual. To do that, I used some 3D modeling software and I remodeled this space as best I could in 3 dimensions. I took the recording I had for that sound and attached it to a wind force and then used it to blow particles into the space and then connected the dots to see the form that the sound could take when manifested physically. The reason I did this and made these complex, hard to understand images was an attempt, albeit a pretty basic one, to communicate. There were incredibly complex systems that existed in these societies, but they existed verbally, socially, and spiritually, but could not be observed physically, or could not be observed physically easily, because it was outside the settler sort of understanding of what space has to be. But these social and spiritual systems are just as real as the physical ones. An example I like to use would be me trying to walk into a female's bathroom. And there's sort of this like guttural response to that because I'm breaking an established taboo in our society. But for me, there might as well be a physical wall there, but there's not. We've constructed one as a society that exists in a cultural and social realm, and I like to call this sort of cultural or social architecture. And in many First Nations in many First Nations, this sort of architecture is much more prevalent than physical architecture. So as I flick through these images, each one is again tied to a story about these settlers discovering these like alien manifestations of architecture, but they're formed out of cultural systems uh, as a means to understand them myself and a means to communicate them back to myself and others, hopefully in the future. And again, sort of, we hear about stories like why stories, Isaac? Because when we hear a story, our mind goes blank. It's sort of ready to fall into this land of make-believe. As you look at the images and you hear the words, the landscape sort of fills and flourishes around you. Buildings appear, people begin to walk through this landscape. With emotional language and imagery, we can change the weather of this mindscape, forcing you to open a window or go inside or enjoy the spring day, helping you experience and understand this metaphysical cultural architecture. So with all that being said, it leads me back to this image here. And the question that's been left unanswered, how does this giant robot relate to Aboriginal culture? I created this image and wrote the accompanying story upon my return to Australia and entered this into the fairy tale architecture competition. So now I want to tell you this story and then explain my sort of thought process and meaning behind it. This is an abbreviated version of the story that I'll tell you now. So this story takes place in the far future, when the effects of climate change have run on unmitigated. Only small patches of land are habitable. These patches have small populations of humans living within them. And this story starts like any good story, with a girl, and she's crying atop a hill. Her father is dying, among a number of others that lay beside her. Oh, sorry, lay beside her father. She's standing up. From a disease called the rasp. This machine here, Helios, arrives into the oasis after 5 years. As he approaches, the air becomes less harsh and clawing in her lungs. The rain stops burning upon her skin. Helios arrives to collect the old and sick, taking them to heaven, Valhalla, the afterlife. What is believed in this sort of whatever's believed in the culture of this ocean, it doesn't really matter. All we know is her father is being taken away. So she sets out to climb aboard Helios and ride with him to heaven or wherever that this machine's taking her, breaking the taboo of her people, touching Helios when she's not sick. For when she was little, her father told her of the ocean and the bluest blue, and how one day he will go there when he's old, and she will go there when he's old. She does not want to wait for when she's old. She wants to go there now for her father. So she searches down, up, over, and through the machine looking for her father. As she searches across the room, as she searches through Helios, she finds a room filled with people trapped in liquid of colors and creeds she's never seen before. As she continues to search for her father, she finds a room where a woman begins to speak about their sins and the apology of the Helios project to restore and take care of the land, to return it to a state in which people can live and ensure genetic diversity within these small groups of humans. She eventually finds her father in one of these vats and doesn't know what to do. She finds her way out of the Helios and sees the ocean for the first time, waiting to see if her father recovers and where Helios will take her next. Now, I've told you this sort of far off story of make believe, and the question is, Isaac, I get it. It relates to Aboriginal culture in a way, maybe, but couldn't you just tell us about the myths and the stories? I could tell you those, but I think in a Western society, our brain and our sort of understanding of culture naturally leads to machines or systems being far more complex than culture. So this story tries to highlight the complexity of cultural systems through technology. The number of many tribes spanning across a vast yet interconnected landscape through a system of land management for the next generation, complex marriage and skin groups that ensure genetic diversity between these small populations. All of these are all of these are present within indigenous culture and present within the story. And I absolutely know if I wasn't here to explain this to you, I don't really think anyone would pick up on these ideas. But I think it's important that it is captured and people can empathize with it. Because maybe one day in the future, you'll be hearing about Aboriginal culture and you may think of this story and a girl and a sick father and be able to empathize with some of the systems that take place. Now, with all that being said, I wanted to talk to you about the journey to get here because it's been living for a long time. And I thought this was sort of the end of my journey for understanding architecture and that. But I soon realized it really wasn't the end. It was sort of this first step on this sort of longer journey, which I've never really talked about before, but I'd like to talk about today. And to begin with, I'd like to talk about this here. It's called the City 4 project. Now, I've been often asked the question by people who follow me on Instagram, what is City 4? And I've often avoided answering the question because I wasn't really sure. I sort of made image after image. I wrote story after story. I made some animations. I might show it at the end because it might be a bit difficult to jump out, but they're all set in this place I called City 4, trying to make meaning of the world through this city and this hum that exists there. But that was never really much of a thesis statement. But it was only recently I realized what it was. City 4 was a place for me to build and construct architecture, this sort of private Eden I'd made where all my competitions, poems, and pieces I make are all connected and sited within this city of City 4. For what City 4 truly has become is my interpretation of the world, my attempt to understand it, my attempt to connect with it, and my attempt to make something cool for it. And I can sort of hear the question in the back of your mind, but why are you telling us about this imagined city after a talk about indigenous architecture and narrative? Because I wanted to tell you about a building that's there and how stories once again help me understand something about my own world and about how people and how they can help me design for people and not for place. So I'm going to talk to you about a competition I entered called the Last Nuclear Bomb Memorial Competition. So all the competitions and things I do, I sort of put into this world called City 4, which has just become this sort of repository, my own sort of urban portfolio. This competition was designed as a memorial to remind people about the power and devastation that these weapons can bring, so we would never have to use them again. And I started this how I start most design projects, and this is probably going to be no surprise to you, to any of you, coming from the guy that won't shut up about stories, is by reading. I read tales and accounts of the impacts of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and trying to sort of comprehend the devastation that was caused by them. For how was a memorial meant to capture that 100,000 people instantly died? That flatline we all fear brought on a scale never seen before. And through sketching and collage and reading, the scale became the very thing the memorial needed. I wanted to give a very tangible understanding to the visitor of just how many people had died. So if you take 100,000 people and convert them into an average volume, you get a cylinder 12 meters wide and 60 meters deep. And I wrote this story about the experience I wanted people to have there. I had this vision of a never-ending staircase, people heading up and up and up, stuck at the bottom with a broken elevator that only goes down. Your lungs grow tired, your lungs are heaving as you ascend further and further and further. Figures begin to appear and objects seem to be carelessly thrown beside them, burnt and disused, eventually emerging beside a great ticking clock, ever so close to midnight. With this simple story, it helped me guide through the experience I wanted people to have in this space. For without stories, I would be lost in the world. I would not be able to empathize. I wouldn't be able to draw. I wouldn't be able to make architecture for people. I needed to use memorable lies about things that did not happen and people that do not exist to understand true things and communicate true things to others. And these are just sort of the first steps I'm hoping to take along this journey that might take me a lifetime, and I hope it does. So I thank you all for listening, and I hope you all take some of my memorable lies with you. Thank you very much. I can show you.
Thank you, Isaac. Sorry, you go on.
I was saying I can quickly show the animation if anyone would like to see it.
Yes, sure.
It's very I'll share content. I gotta stop sharing quickly. It won't let me. I'll just go and test screen. Can everyone see that? So it should be a big scary face.
It's uploading, yes.
Okay.
I think you need to play that from the beginning because...
Oh, yeah. It's very short, but it's just another piece of work that goes in City 4. So,
brilliant.
So are there any questions at all?
Perfect.
I'm happy to answer any.
Thank you very much, Isaac. As I mentioned, I think I'm personally very impressed by your work and the process, you know, of your thinking and the way you basically inject all those imagination into your work. So it's pretty impressive for me. Does anyone have any particular questions for Isaac? Yeah, lots of thank you messages from Sally, Justin, Dylan, Chris. Yeah, I think, can you see the
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone.
yes.
Saying thank you.
Thank you so much. So Isaac, can I just quickly ask you, when did you start, this methodology, the way you think? Because I understand it's a different method to express your thoughts. When did this happen, and what inspired you at the first place?
So it happened during my thesis is when sort of this process sort of began to emerge. And it came from like having a deep sort of understanding or wanting to always be reading and understanding stories. And then it's sort of developed and developed from there is the best. Yeah, it started during my thesis is when I sort of learned about this method that worked for me is sort of telling stories. But if I go back even further, like I always engaged more for myself in learning and understanding was when people told me stories. So I just sort of kept myself engaged in architecture by telling myself stories or making stories. Like I think it sort of comes from like wanting to be a writer but never being good at English.
Mm.
Mm.
Thank you. Douglas says, could you talk a little bit about how you create your drawings?
Sure. So all of the imagery is made through Blender and Photoshop. So I will model usually, or so the first process starts with sketching out sort of in a like on A4 paper what I want roughly the shot or like idea to be. And that could be like a storyboard and then like a mind map that goes along with it. And then I'll go into 3D modeling software and model up roughly what I think things should look like. And then I use like a make 2D command to get out line drawings, which then I then take into Photoshop or Affinity Photo and color in. So it's like a giant paint by numbers, essentially. Yeah.
Thank you. Justin, would you like to turn on your mic and ask your question? Justin? Oh, okay. Trying to turn it on. Sure. So Sally says, excellent to hear your thesis helped you to understand your approach to design. Will carry you through your architectural journey. Yes, that's perfect. So while Justin is trying to turn on his mic, just out of curiosity, you are working basically as a graduate now, Isaac. How have you found the basically the association between the real, work practice and your thoughts, your creative thoughts? How, do you um, well basically use your thoughts in your everyday work, or how do you associate them basically?
So in an like an everyday sort of association, when it comes to sort of designing and things like that, when I recently got to work on a project where this sort of came to the forefront. It was about this sort of journey through the space and how that comes through. So it's all like this usually is always sort of front endwards. I would find like it's sort of the like the blocking out of the space. Like when you do a program of how spaces fit together, like even if I don't write out like a beautiful narrative, I still think of the sort of journey and those sort of beats I want that story to hit as someone enters or walks through a building. So there was recently a project where that was became really prominent. And then like as well, when you think of the sort of end of a project and you sort of getting down to the nitty gritty of what you're specifying, I personally always find it helpful to imagine and walk through that space step by step. is sort of the way. But like it depends as well on where you're working in a project and things like that. Like documentation, I'm not there drawing flashing details thinking, oh yes, the like sometimes, but like I'm not thinking of a story as I draw like a simple detail, if that makes sense. But sometimes you do. Yeah. Mm.
Yes, that's right. Brilliant. Does anyone else have any questions? I think Justin is trying to log in again. We might wait for a few seconds.
Yeah.
I can read out your question.
The question was about how fragments of stories coalesce and become other stories. Is that, yeah, so I can answer that question. So that's sort of what became City 4 for me, was how I was working on different projects and things like that. And I don't know why I did it, but I sort of began to construct this head canon of all the work I did fitting into this sort of place I called City 4, and it sort of became my place where I enter these competitions and things like that that are all trying to be critical or critique something or understand something. And I like the idea of sort of these different pieces of the stories that I'm telling all sort of being part of this sort of grand epic of this city. And that's more the reason they sort of all come together and become these other stories is mainly just because I think it's cool and I like it. Like it's I've always sort of really liked these sort of when little pieces are referenced in another story and then you sort of pick up on those. And I don't really like being, or like when I'm reading, I don't really like being spoon-fed, and I like to leave these sort of breadcrumb trails that are in my work that you can sort of link and connect together. And it's more, I just do it for myself because I find it really, really fun to do and keeps me really engaged with what I'm thinking about. But it's, yeah, they're all sort of in one story, if that answers the question.
Some further comment from Justin. Yeah, do you want to read it out, Isaac?
Yeah, I really like the breadcrumb freedom that gives between the gaps. It makes me think of how Niels Spiller worked, but also the ethics you say, like Macromegas. Yeah. So again, like massive influences in my work, and I love the sort of bits that are left for the user to fill in for themselves. Like that's sort of what I was talking about with like the user is the most important person in this space. And I like to extend that into my work of there's meaning I can put into my work and leave this sort of gap for you to write your own story and put it into that. And I think that's how we can engage with architecture and yeah, a really, really deep level. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. All right. So I think if no one else has any question, we might wrap up the session. I think Dylan Gorton has a question.
Sorry, I was just in the middle of typing it, but I thought it'd be quicker then. Oh, wicked stuff, Isaac, and good to hear what you're getting up to, mate.
Thank you.
I was halfway through typing, so I'll kind of read it out. And as usual, I don't really know where I'm going when I ask these kind of questions. But I guess your work is so imaginative and kind of digital, but based on these real world experiences and places that inspired them or sparked them. Where do you see a version of this being physicalized in the public realm, or like how can this be brought more into the built environment? Because I think it's what's really lacking when we think of the characterless, you know, modernity, I suppose. And it would be amazing to see aspects of this become more evident and present when we walk around our places.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because I have no idea about how to actually pull it into. That's why I built a whole other city to put it in because it was like I can't fit it into like I had to sort of build this mirror universe city of City 4 where I put things in. Can I move that, please? Yeah, I had to build this sort of mirror universe to put things in. But I think is like maybe in like another 5 years I'll be able to answer that question, because at the moment I'm still trying to figure out how to pull this sort of speculative work in some sense into a physical reality. The easiest way I've found is through sort of installation work, is sort of the way I've been thinking about how I could go about it, is making sort of these experiential moments within a building. So you still have your normal building, but there could be like simple rooms or spaces that have this very experiential quality that I'm trying to communicate. But as well, like it would be amazing to build some of this insane stuff, but it's just how do we do it not in the mirror universe of City 4? So that's my best attempt at that question.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It would be great to see that. Yeah. Cheers.
No problem.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Isaac. That was very insightful. I've recorded your presentation, so anyone who misses it might want to just go online on architalk.org is the website, and they could see both your ArchiTalk and the previous ones there. I would just like to remind everyone that exceptionally we have another ArchiTalk tomorrow. It is 4 p.m., 4 to 5 p.m. And basically, Justin will be moderating that session. One of the principals of Hassel London will be presenting tomorrow. Julian Gitcham is our keynote speaker. So please join us if you can, if you have time. Otherwise, you can always watch the recording. So I would like to appreciate your time again, and see you next time. Thanks, Isaac.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Isaac. Sorry, I had to run. Cheers.
Thank you.